Hello and welcome to another lesson from Simply PE, this time in the aerobic and anaerobic respiration and exercise. Just a reminder of these presentations, the yellow text boxes are the tasks for students, the green text boxes are the note-taking sections, the blue text boxes are differentiation tasks, and the red text boxes are the teaching and learning strategies and ideas for the practitioner. So in terms of the AQA GCSE syllabus, what do we need to know about aerobic and anaerobic exercise? Well, first of all, you need to be able to understand what those two key words actually mean. So have a clear understanding of aerobic and anaerobic exercise. You also need to know the formula as to what entails and what makes up aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. And then finally, in terms of this lesson, you will hopefully be able to apply different sports and different movement sporting action examples, linking them both to aerobic and anaerobic respiration, and also linking it to the intensity. So a little bit to do with training thresholds. So without further ado, let's get going. Okay, so first of all, let's look at aerobic exercise. So first and foremost, when we do any form of exercise or any sporting action or any movement in particular, our muscles contract, okay, in order to help our skeletal system, our bones to move and for us to actually move. So in order for us to exercise, we need to supply those muscles with the energy that is required for those muscle contractions to take place. Now, in order for that to happen, we need to break down the food that we have in terms of glucose being the primary kind of energy kind of food substance that we have, and we use oxygen to do that, especially when we look at aerobic respiration and aerobic exercise. So that in itself is what aerobic exercise is. It's the breaking down of glucose into glycogen, and we're using oxygen as part of that process. So aerobic exercise, as it says there, occurs at both a low or moderate level of intensity. So we're looking at examples, as it says there, of things, and you can see in the picture, of cycling, of jogging, of walking. And if we think of aerobic exercise, we're looking at anything under 80% of our maximum heart rate. That would be us working aerobically, so with oxygen. I want you to look at this question here. What is the training zone required to see benefits of the cardiovascular and respiratory system? So pause your video here and see if you can answer that question. So as I mentioned, aerobic exercise is anything under 80%. In order for us to actually start to see some of the benefits of our training, okay, the training zone that we're really kind of looking for is anywhere between 60 to 80% of our maximum heart rate. That would be us working again in that aerobic threshold zone, and we're going to start to see some benefits of not only to the cardiovascular system, but also to the respiratory system. So I've just explained obviously breaking down of the food, the glucose in particular, and we use oxygen to do that as part of the process. So when that reaction takes place, so when we break down those glucose and we provide our muscles with energy, okay, and we use obviously oxygen to do that, it creates a reaction, okay, so it provides us with energy, but it also produces water and carbon dioxide as two waste products. And obviously with the carbon dioxide, when we exhale, when we breathe out, that's us, that's our body, that's our respiratory system now getting out that waste product in terms of carbon dioxide. The water that we produced, if we exercise for long enough, we might start to perspirate, we might start to sweat, and that would obviously come out in the form of water. So that formula there, glucose plus oxygen equals energy plus carbon dioxide plus water. So you need to make sure that you understand and you are aware of the actual formula for the PE exam, because they might ask you in a multiple choice question, or they might ask you what is aerobic respiration or aerobic exercise, and you writing that formula down will be able to get you at least that mark, and then you might need to be able to explain it if it's asking for an AO2 type of question. Okay, so let's move on to anaerobic exercise. So when we think of anaerobic exercise, we are still producing energy, but in order for us to do that, we're now doing that without any oxygen. So there's an absence of oxygen as we produce that energy for our muscles to be able to contract. So this type of exercise will often involve very high intensity, okay, and also over a short period of time. So in essence, when we're talking about anaerobic exercise or anaerobic respiration, if we're thinking of training thresholds, we're looking at over 80% of our maximum heart rate. So that threshold normally is somewhere in the region of 80 to 90% in terms of maximum heart rate. If we continue to work anaerobically, we will eventually become breathless, and next lesson we'll start to look at oxygen debt being the consequence of working anaerobically. So again, pause your video here. You've got an example of weightlifting. Which of the two that we've looked at in terms of aerobic or anaerobic would we associate weightlifting with? Okay, so hopefully you've unpaused your video. You've hopefully been able to explain and understand that weightlifting would be called upon and looked upon as an example of anaerobic exercise. It's over a short period of time and it will be very high intensity in order for the weightlifter to actually lift the specific weight that is required. Okay, so when we think of anaerobic exercise, we've talked about the absence of oxygen. And as that has happened, because we don't have enough oxygen within our body to break down those glucose, okay, we are not basically producing enough carbon dioxide and water as we would aerobically. So anaerobically, what happens is that glucose that we use as part of the energy now gets converted into a waste product which we call lactic acid. Okay, so again, for the exam, you need to be able to be aware of the anaerobic exercise respiration formula, which is glucose equals energy plus lactic acid. So in essence, what is lactic acid? It's obviously a waste product that, as we've just mentioned, that is produced, okay, anaerobically. Okay, and in essence, it's a mild poison that enters our muscles. And obviously the fact that we have this as a byproduct and a waste product which is then produced anaerobically causes a few things. It causes muscle fatigue, so it causes our muscles to tire easily and quickly. It also can cause discomfort such as muscle pain, and it can also cause things like muscle cramps. So for those muscle contractions to start to spasm, and that is obviously what forms muscle cramps. This is why when we think about anaerobic exercise, we can only perform this for very short periods of time because ultimately our muscles begin to tire, and if they begin to tire, it's telling our body to stop and we can't perform that movement for a longer period of time. So again, pause your video here and see if you can answer this question. How does lactic acid actually have an impact on sporting performance? So hopefully you've unpaused the video there. When we think of lactic acid in terms of how it will impact sporting performance, well, we can see the causes that it, the problems it sort of creates in terms of our body. But think about how does it impact performance? Ultimately, if we have muscle fatigue, we're going to perform something slower. Okay, our muscles are tiring, so we're not going to be as quick as we normally were. We're also going to lack that intensity. Okay, we're also going to lack power. Okay, so we're actually probably going to get slower, but we're also going to get less strong. We're going to become a little bit weaker. Okay, because ultimately our muscles will be starting to cramp up, they'll be starting to pain, and that's obviously causing that discomfort. It's going to encourage us to stop. It's going to encourage us to basically stop anything that we're doing because ultimately our body is starting to fatigue and starting to shut down. So to finish off the lesson, let's start to apply some sporting examples to this specific topic. So as you will see some pictures below, I want you to decide whether you think they are aerobic or anaerobic sporting actions. So the first one we're looking at is javelin. The second one is heading in football. The third one is walking. And the fourth one is a 100-meter sprint. So pause your video here, Jot down those 4 different either sports or sporting actions and decide what you think they are. Okay, so hopefully you've unpaused the video there, you've come up with your answers. When we think of javelin, we're talking about an anaerobic sporting action. It's over a short period of time, high intensity, as that javelin thrower is about to release the javelin and throw as far as they can. Okay, so they need that muscular strength over a short burst period. When we think of heading in football, this is also anaerobic in terms of an action. Okay, the explosive power to jump upwards, as you can see in that performance there, and obviously to head the ball. Okay, so heading would be seen as an anaerobic action. Walking, on the other hand, would be aerobic. Okay, so with oxygen, it's low intensity. Okay, and we can obviously perform that for a long period of time. And then finally, 100-meter sprinting, hopefully you've got the fact there that that's an anaerobic activity. Okay, so lasting somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 to 13 seconds, depending on your performance. Okay, but high intensity taking place there, and that would be anaerobic, so with the absence of oxygen. Okay, so let's look at a few more examples. Again, do exactly the same thing for these next 4 sporting examples. So the first one, gymnastics vault, a tennis serve, yoga, and high jump. So again, pause your video, jot those down, and decide whether you think they're aerobic or anaerobic. All right, so hopefully you've come up with the answers to each one. When we think of gymnastics vaulting, we think of the performer sprinting towards that vault and then exploding upwards onto the vault and doing their specific move before landing on the mat. So that would be anaerobic, an explosive power movement. Tennis, on the other hand, would also be, when we're looking at specifically the tennis serve, an anaerobic action. So again, high intensity over a very short period of time. So anaerobic. Yoga, on the other hand, okay, these are kind of movements that are taking place, which will be kind of low intensity. Okay, so thinking of improving our flexibility, relaxation. The fact it's low intensity and we can do it for a long period of time, yoga would be an aerobic exercise. And then finally, high jump, explosive power again, as we kind of approach the bar and then we're looking to jump over it. That explosive power means we're looking at an anaerobic action. Okay, so high intensity over a short period of time. Okay, so the previous questions were looking at AO1s, your knowledge. Now we're going to try and apply some more examples, and we're going to start to look at AO2 and eventually a little bit of AO3 if we can. So this question here, using sporting examples and sporting actions, explain how team sports use a combination of aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So again, pause your video here, make a note of that question and see if you can answer it using some of those diagrams, those pictures, as good kind of sporting team examples that you could use. Okay, so hopefully when you post your answers to me in terms of your notes today and answering this question, I'll be able to give you a bit more direct feedback. But if you're kind of just watching this remotely, when we think about this answer here, when we think about team sports, they're using a combination of both aerobic and anaerobic. So if we think of basketball, football, hockey there as prime examples, not at any point during the game, we could be walking, we could be jogging, we could be running, we could be doing some sprints, and that's showing a combination of aerobic, so working with oxygen when we're working at a low and medium intensity, so when we're jogging and when we're walking, but then the sprinting element, part of those team sports, okay, will involve anaerobic. When we think of the actual movement types itself, so basketball in terms of, for example, like a layup, okay, that explosive power upwards towards the basketball hoop and backboard, we're looking at, again, anaerobic sporting actions. For football, if we look at things like heading, okay, or sometimes maybe kicking the ball itself, yeah, and kicking it powerfully, they can be referred to as anaerobic sporting actions. In hockey, the same thing, yeah, when we're actually hitting that ball with the hockey stick nice and hard, we're looking again at anaerobic explosive power movements there as well. So we've got a combination of different sporting actions, okay, that we could justify to explain when we're using aerobic and also anaerobic sporting movements, and also in terms of intensity during the course of the game. Okay, so let's look at this next question. So it says there, long distance running, jogging is mainly an aerobic activity. Explain why and when Mo Farah will be using aerobic and anaerobic respiration during his 5,000 meter race. So again, pause your video here, see if you can come up with an answer. Okay, so hopefully you've come up with an answer there when we're looking at Mo Farah and how is he working aerobically, but also at what point during the course of the race might he be working anaerobically as well during that 5,000 meter race. So here are a few things that you could have put down. Obviously at the start and the main part of the race, he will pretty much be working where he has enough oxygen to supply his working muscles, so therefore he's working aerobically to gain that energy and that process of energy for that part of the race. He's obviously doing that for a sustained and long period of time, and the intensity, although it will be higher compared to an average person, the intensity that he will be kind of working at, that he's used to, will be fairly low or to medium. Okay, so he's working aerobically for the majority part of the race. However, anaerobically, during the last kind of 400 meters, so during that last lap where the bell goes during the finishing line and he's then sprinting as well as his competitors during that 400 meter, that last lap, the intensity will increase massively. And as that happens, okay, he's now not able to get the required amount of oxygen to the working muscles to provide him with the energy that he needs to keep his speed up. And as he's working at a higher intensity, okay, that will then turn to anaerobically. Okay, so him exercising anaerobically. You may have mentioned that it was the last kind of 100 meters or 200 meters, or you could have mentioned that he's reacting at some point towards the end of the race where he's got to react to someone that's already sprinted past him, or to fend off any competitors so that he stays at the front of the pack. Okay, but ultimately, as it says there, he's unable to provide the oxygen to the working muscles, relying on the glucose, and because it's not broken down by oxygen, it might form and create obviously lactic acid at the end, and that's why you'll see that he's quite breathless at the finishing line as well, because he started to work anaerobically as well. Okay, so finally for the practitioners in terms of this lesson and topic, a few ideas for you. Obviously, if you've got an opportunity to do some practical elements to this, then try and go outside, try and get your students to do some aerobic and anaerobic sporting actions so that they can at least put it into context and they can actually perform some of those, and they can start to think about why something's aerobic and anaerobic. And that links nicely eventually looking at oxygen depth, for example, and also things like the short-term effects and the medium-term effects of exercise. So you can start bringing in lots of elements there in regards to that, and also even things like tidal volume you could mention as well as many other bits there. So it's real kind of cross links there of different topics and themes that you can bring into that practically. Video wise, try and show a few sporting examples of where you can see the context of the athlete, whether they're working aerobically or anaerobically. And even if you're watching, for example, a race, as I mentioned in the previous example of Mo Farah, of how it starts aerobically and then turns into anaerobic. You might watch an example of a footballer where, you know, if it's on a player cam, for example, and you watch that person for 2-3 minutes of when they might sprint, they might walk, they might jog, just to show the different intensities and how they change as well from a team sporting element. And then finally, try and maybe compose and try and think of a 9 marker that you could set your students as well, so that it kind of summarizes this nicely in terms of a topic, and they can extend some of their learning by talking about not only aerobic but also anaerobic, and also even the effects of things like lactic acid and how that might have an impact on sporting performance. So this should hopefully tie in nicely. Thanks for watching. Best of luck in terms of teaching this task, and I hope you picked up some key elements in terms of your revision. Thanks.